Hi, this is Adam Stofsky with Briefly, and I'm here with Grant Jahner for our next legal information video. And we're going to talk about today some interesting issues around healthcare and health law. Grant, today we're going to talk about something called share of cost in Medi-Cal. What is that? What are we even talking about here?
Yeah, unfortunately, this is one of the more misunderstood items within the Medi-Cal world. We have a lot of clients that come to us and aren't really sure what's going on. They think they might have to be paying the state or their health plan or even the county a certain amount of money. And so I'd like to try and explain exactly what share of cost is. And so there are a couple different Medi-Cal programs that the state has. And essentially, if somebody is over income for the main Medi-Cal program, that's often called aged and disabled federal poverty level program, which is tough to say, but I think once you're over income for that program, the state or the county rather pushes you into what's called the share of cost program. They do a completely different calculation, and it acts like a monthly deductible where these patients or Medi-Cal beneficiaries would have to incur or pay a certain amount of their deductible, quote, share of cost, and then the state kicks in and pays the remaining portion or their liability above and beyond that. So if someone has a share of cost that's maybe they've given $2,000 and the county says your share of cost is now this amount. They have their Medicare benefits that are paying usually the first 80% of the cost. And then whatever's left over would be out of pocket for the patient. Now, the share of cost kicks in. So they're maybe going to the doctor's office for $100 as their copay, or they're getting a prescription for $20. They're kind of totaling all of those in a month. And then once they've exceeded or met that share of cost, that $2,000 limit, that's when the state kicks in and then says, you can stop paying. Now the state will pay any above and beyond. So this is usually most helpful if there's like a big emergency, like an emergency room visit. So someone might go to the emergency room and instead of having an $80,000 bill, which would be just, unreasonable for anybody to pay, the share of cost is like a safety net. It says, nope, you don't have to pay the full amount. We'll stop it at $2,000. You only have to figure out how to pay $2,000 and the state pays the rest.
Okay, so before you go on, I
Yeah,
want to break this down because it's confusing.
definitely.
So, okay, I'm going to try to explain it back to you, and
Yeah,
you can tell me if I'm understanding it. So Medi-Cal has it's kind of regular program, the aged and disabled program, where they basically pay everything, right? Right. That's for lower income people or people who meet certain income or health qualifications, right?
yeah. It's about 138% of the poverty is the right amount, which is hard to figure out, but it is very low income, and that's
Pretty low income.
yeah,
So at a certain point, the state may think you're over that limit, and so that's when you get this letter that says, "Hey, you have to pay something now," and it's called share of cost.
correct.
That's what we're talking about.
Yep,
And
exactly.
and um and so it can be kind of scary. Share of cost, $2,000. I got to pay $2,000, but you're saying that's a misunderstanding. That instead of it, yeah, can you explain that one more time? What that actually means?
Yeah, so it's not an obligation to pay the county every month. It is only a share of cost, or you only pay this deductible, right? Is a better way to explain it. Kind of like if you had another insurance plan, is you only have to pay the share of, or you are only on the hook or liable for this amount, and then it stops your kind of liability. So you don't actually pay anything. You're not obligated to pay each and every month. It's just if you want to access what Medi-Cal has to offer, then you have to meet your share of cost
Right. So if I don't ever go to the doctor that year,
yeah,
then I don't have to pay anything. But if I go to the emergency room and they say, "Hey, this is going to be $8,000," I just have to pay the first 2,000 of it, and then I'm off the hook for the rest.
right, exactly. So some clients, that's great. They don't go to the doctor that often. They don't really have to worry about the share of cost. It just kind of works in the background and makes sure that if and when, or hopefully not, they have a high medical expense in a month, it helps them out, saves them. But for people that are, high utilization, they go to the doctor a lot, they have a lot of prescriptions, maybe they're in dialysis or something like that where they're going a lot, they may want to try and avoid a share of cost and,
Got
get
it.
back to that aged and disabled program or another alternative program to get them, quote, full scope benefits.
Got it. So we'll come to that in a second,
Yeah.
right? So this $2,000, is it always 2,000? Does it change depending on your income level?
Yeah, it does change in your income level. So they take your gross income from maybe a pension or Social Security. They take out some deductions like a standard deduction, and then any medical expenses that you have, like a Part B premium, for example, is the most common one. And we really want to make sure that the county, when they're doing this, is counting all of the right deductions. We've seen some cases where the county is not counting the right deductions, but there are limited deductions. A lot of clients want to count deductions like their utilities or rent and things like that. Unfortunately, the state's rules only look at the standard deductions and then the deductions for medical expenses. So,
Got it. So that's a good segue then into the next question, which is, okay, well, I got right. So it's good to know, all right, well, I don't have to pay this. It functions like a deductible or like an out-of-pocket maximum, to
mhm.
use insurance speak. Um, but yeah, wouldn't it be better not to have this at all, right? So if you get this letter, how do you go about challenging it? And
Yeah,
then and then we can talk about how you figure out the deductions and the calculations around income.
yeah. I think the math is, I think, definitely nice to see written down sometimes, but we'll do our best job. So people will get a notice of action. That's the official notice from the county saying, here is your determination. You either qualify again for full scope benefits, or you have this share of cost, and it gives you the math. Typically, people have about 90 days to request a hearing to contest that. That's the formal way to contest this, get the county's attention. You may have a state hearing. It's all a free process, part of our constitutional rights to make sure that our benefits aren't being taken away. But most importantly, when people get this notice, they have a really short turnaround time to request their hearing to make sure that their benefits don't change. So it's called aid paid pending or continuing benefits. Essentially, as soon as they get the notice of action, request the hearing, and it should be done before the change. So if the county sends a notice on January 15th, the benefits are going to change at the end of January. That beneficiary has to request their hearing by the end of January to keep their Medi-Cal going without any changes. Now, unfortunately, if they miss that window and they request the hearing in February, that's when they now are kind of scrambling to try and get their benefits back. But there is this appeal process to try and escalate it, because we have so many clients that try and keep calling the county workers, and they're not able to resolve it. So this is the best way to try and get the attention of the county and get these things fixed and sorted out.
Is this like a live hearing in a courtroom, or do they happen on Zoom? Or do they just happen on paper? What kind of hearing is it?
Yeah, so people can call in to the state. They can request it online, fax or mail. I usually request or advise people, you know, call in so they get that immediate response that they did it, or online they get the immediate hearing number. Otherwise, they're kind of waiting. The hearing is all free. There's an opportunity to negotiate with the county before the hearing. Now, if there's not
Oh,
a resolution, so I'd say 90% of our cases can be resolved before the hearing, because they're often just misunderstandings about the math or the kind of
or some obvious
miscalculation.
mistake or
Yeah, an
something like
obvious
that.
mistake. So most people don't even have to go to the hearing. And even as advocates, we're able to settle out most of these through what's called a withdrawal or conditional withdrawal. Basically, the county's just promising we did it, or we promised to fix it. Now, the hearings are very informal. It's not like anything on TV. There are no juries, there's no objections. It's very informal. They can be done over the phone, video, or in person. The phone hearings are the most common for almost all of the cases that we do, because claims can be in their home. They can just be, with their friends and family and support. The attorneys or advocates or even a family member that's supporting can also be in their location. So it's a lot less stress on people to do it over the phone. So they call you at a specific time. Usually it's within 90 days of the request for the hearing. And then the hearing is held. The judge asks questions. They're the informal fact finder. And they oftentimes dictate, and everyone's different. Every administrative judge is different. Some are very structured and some are very loose. But essentially they ask, the beneficiary, what's going on with your case? They ask the county what's going on with, their math. They try and make a decision, and that's how it goes. And then they issue an administrative decision. Yeah, within 90 days of the request for hearing is the most typical deadline.
Okay, great, interesting. That's encouraging that it's a fairly simple,
And it's
fairly
short.
simple
It's
process.
not like some legal cases, which can be many years, or other appeals process, which can be years. This is pretty short, so you get a response quickly.
Okay, all right. Now for the last thing I want to ask you about is, let's talk about some of the specific, I guess, math, for lack of a better word,
Yeah.
what are the most common like issues that you see in terms of reasons why you can appeal or deductions that you might be able to make to your income? What are the most common?
Yeah. So say someone is over the income threshold, maybe they're making about $2,000 in their Social Security, which at this time is, over the threshold after the deductions. The county takes what's called the standard deduction, which is $20. And then if you're over the threshold, they determine that you have what's called a maintenance need. And this is one of the most confusing portions that we get for our clients. So it's actually a figure that was determined in 1989. So it hasn't changed in 35 years, where the state says a single person can maintain their life on $600 a month, and then the remaining portion can go towards their medical expenses. And that's actually how the share of cost is calculated. It's not always reasonable in this day and age. Cost of living in California and across the states is very expensive, um, especially in our region. So now for a couple, the limit is, or the maintenance need rather, is $935. So they take your income, they take out the standard deduction, and they say, here's the maintenance need. The rest you can spend towards your medical expenses. And that's actually the share of cost calculation. So how do we avoid now someone like you mentioned earlier, potentially spending, their share of costs is $2,000 or more, depending on how high their income is? How do we pivot and get people back to full scope benefits or reduce the share of cost? So one of the most common ways is for people to do what we call a spend down or reducing accountable income. Now, again, what are the allowable deductions? Unfortunately, the state has a really limited list of what's an allowable deduction to reduce the accountable income. And those are other health coverage like buying vision or dental coverage that's supplemental. So, some people call organizations like HICAP, which are Medicare advocates, or calling like AARP or other organizations to go buy supplemental coverage, and then turning in those receipts to the county and saying, hey, I'm spending this extra money, therefore take that as a deduction. And hopefully that brings me from above the threshold of the Medi-Cal below the threshold, and now I get the full benefits. So that's one way to do it. The other one is for people that have Social Security disability benefits like SSDI, or formerly, so when people have SSDI and they age into 65, they actually it's still traced back and they're still in the system as, quote, disabled. So the benefit or the same rule still applies. So if someone that had SSDI or still has SSDI can benefit from this program called the Working Disabled Program. Essentially, someone who is, quote, disabled and working, and the definition of working is so broad and generous for beneficiaries that it can include things like recycling cans in your own home. Turn in a receipt for $3, once a month, and then turn that into the county, and you have SSDI benefits. And now you can get full scope benefits in most cases. There are some exceptions, but essentially those are the two most common routes that we try and have our clients explore is, can they do a spend down? Sometimes a spend down is just too much. And there's no way for them to spend, hundreds of dollars on the supplemental coverage, and they have to make that decision. But we often really try and explore the Working Disabled Program because a lot of clients aren't evaluated for it or just don't even know about it. So we have clients that have watered plants for neighbors, they've fed a goldfish, they've read books to kids, they've babysat, they've picked up mail for a neighbor, anything, just some nominal job, $5. They don't have to be at a 9 to 5 or get any formal job in the out in society. It can just be something for a friends or family, and it helps people a lot. We have clients that have really high need that really benefit from this program. And then again, one of the most important benefits that I can think of is when people get back into having full scope Medi-Cal, they get their Part B premiums paid for by the state. So that can be another couple $100 depending on the household that gets reimbursed for the beneficiary. And more money in people's pockets is a good idea for groceries and any other utilities right now.
Great. All right, Grant, thanks so much. How can Inland County's legal services help out?
Yeah, we provide free legal services to residents of Riverside and San Bernardino County. They can call us and we do an intake. We try and respond really quickly to try and help out our clients advise them on their rights, evaluate them for the right programs, kind of do the math that we were talking about today, and or potentially make calls to the county and or even represent them for their administrative hearings, and making sure that they're getting all the benefits that they're entitled to.
Great. All right. Thanks so much, Grant.
Thank you.